MattK, food for thought. Food for thought, MattK. Fuel for thought. Sorry, fuel for thought.
Fuel for thought. What sort of fuel does your vehicle run on? Is it petrol? Is it diesel? Or perhaps even gas? I was at my local Shell service station the other week filling up, and it prompted me to think about this everyday commodity that we all buy. We all fill up our cars normally every week or so, but when was the last time you stopped to think about this commodity that we all buy to put into our cars? Things like where does this fuel come from, and how is it made? How much do we use in Australia, and what are the different types of fuel that we can buy in Australia? What questions I have. So as I was standing at the Bowser last week, shaking the final drops of that liquid gold out of the nozzle into the tank, I decided to make it my mission tonight to give you all a brief but well-researched overview of the fuel that we all buy for our vehicles. Now, before I go too far this evening, I'd like to say I'm not here to make an environmental statement or preach to you about that we should all save the environment, use less fuel, drive Prius cars or anything like that. So you can all relax. My interest is only in the fuel sector of Australia and its economic scale and the important role that fuel plays in our everyday lives. So within 2012, the Australian Bureau of Statistics figures showed that Australia used 31,000 million litres of fuel in registered vehicles. So you get a scale or some perspective on that. It's had about 12,000 Olympic swimming pools of fuel we used in Australia last year. Of that fuel that was produced, Australia produced about 75% of it, and the rest of it came from, 25% came from Singapore. Most of that was extracted from Malaysia. The oil that makes the fuel that Australia uses comes from several major oil fields around Australia. There's several main ones. So the main ones are in Bass Strait, the northern part of South Australia, off the west coast of Western Australia, the Timor Sea, and also inland Queensland. The oil that we use to produce fuel in Australia, quite remarkably, all started its life around about 65 million years ago. And in fact, some fuel can actually be up to 350 million years old. So some crude oil coming out of the ground is up to 350 million years old, which is quite remarkable. Nearly all of Melbourne's fuel comes from the Bass Strait, comes into the Port of Hastings, down the peninsula, where it's actually piped across the bay, or under the bay, over to the refining plants at Altona and Geelong. And to produce 1 litre of fuel requires approximately 2 litres of oil. So 2 litres of crude oil coming out of the ground to produce 1 litre of petrol, roughly. So if you think of Australia's 31,000 million litres or 31,000 megalitres of fuel every year, that's over 60,000 million litres of crude oil coming out of the ground. That's an enormous amount. To produce our litre of fuel, it goes through a refining process to take out the impurities and other byproducts. This process is called fractional distillation, where the crude is heated up to a very high temperature, around about 200 degrees up to 300 degrees, where it vaporises, so the vapour comes off the fuel. That vapour is collected, and then it's recondensed into fuel. You could even say it's recapitulated into fuel. The byproducts of the refining process are not lost either, they actually are reused, so the byproducts of crude oil go into things like plastics and also cosmetics. The process for refining diesel is very similar. It's actually heated to a higher temperature, over 300 degrees, but diesel feels more like oil. It's not a spirit. It's more like oil, and it's got a much higher energy density than petrol. So all the fuel that comes out of all the oil that comes out of the ground, all the fuel that goes into, where does it all go? Well, in Australia at the moment there's around about 16.6 million registered vehicles. So that's cars, trucks, buses, jet skis, everything that's registered. And about 2.9 million of those are diesel powered. So that means about 80% of all of the vehicles on the road in Australia run on your standard petrol, unleaded fuel. In fact, over 90% of the fuel bowsers at service stations all pump unleaded fuel, so it's either the unleaded ethanol, petrol, or high octane. In Australia, there's over 6,500 fuel outlets around the country, and interestingly, this is less than half from what there was back in the 1970s, when there was over 20,000. So, as the market's consolidated over the years, fuel stations have become much larger with much more pumps, or many more pumps, than what we had back in the 70s. Woolworths and Caltex have most of the market, so 42% is controlled by Woolworths and Caltex. Coles, Express and Shell, their partnership has 25% of the market. BP 16% and the independents are about 17% of the market. Interesting fact about petrol, I don't know if you know that petrol is actually changing colour this year for the first time in many years. So petrol up until now for quite a few years has been purple bronze. But the Australian Institute of Petroleum has announced this year that all petrol is changing colour to red-orange. So you can keep an eye out for that next time you're splashing with the petrol around your local service station. The point of it is to so you can more easily distinguish the fuel when it's involved. So all petrol is dyed. It's all unnatural dye. But the purpose is to align Australia with the rest of Asia Pacific. So fuel consumption, once we've got all this oil out of the ground and produced all this fuel, how far does it actually get us? The Australian Bureau of Statistics figures also show that the fuel consumption, the average rate of fuel consumption for all vehicles in Australia for last year was 13.7 litres per 100 kilometres. So if you're getting better than that, you're beating the average. You're doing good for the environment. So that concludes my informational foray into the fuel industry, something we all buy and use almost every week to power our petrol cars and diesel trucks. The next time you're standing at the Bowser, your local service station, with that mindless stare, you've done it many times before, think about the 31,000 million litres of petrol pumping through the Bowsers of 6,500 fuel stations around Australia, produced from oil that started to form between 65 and 300 million years ago. Fuel is an extraordinary commodity that we all rely on.